Today, Parshat Va'era, we are exploring the Why Don't You Shut Your Mouth edition of Torah learning. And it begins with, as I mentioned earlier, God says to Moshe, known as Elohim, Vayidaber Elohim. And Elohim says to Moshe, Ani Adonai, I am Elohim, but I am also Adonai. And I am the Lord, and I appeared to your ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, using a different name, El Shaddai, not Elohim, not Adonai, El Shaddai, Ushmi Adonai lo nodati lahem. They never knew my name, Adonai. Very interesting beginning of a portion. Now God is talking to Moses as Elohim, referencing the name Adonai, which was unknown to his ancestors, but the ancestors knew God as El Shaddai, which means the Lord of sustenance. Also, I want you to know, Moses, I have a covenant with your ancestors, giving them the land, and I've also heard your cry in Egypt. And I've recalled my covenant. Therefore, now I want you to understand, Moses, go to the people and tell them I'm going to take them out. I've heard their cry. And now it's time to go to Pharaoh and start hammering him. It's time to start changing the conversation. Now, for those of you who observe Passover in a traditional fashion, you know that it is traditional to drink 4 cups of wine. Those of you who are really traditional drink Manischewitz. Those of you who don't really want to do that, you can drink 4 cups of the best wine you could find, anything you want. And the reason we drink the 4 cups comes from this week's portion. It says 4 different ways of redemption. V'hotzeti, I will take you out. V'hitzalti, I will rescue. V'ga'alti, I will redeem you. V'lakachti, I will remove you. Those are the 4 different references to Exodus. We drink 4 cups of celebration. There's a 5th cup. And there's a debate. Do we drink 5? Because it also says, V'heveti, I will bring you to the land. So maybe we should celebrate that too. And the answer is that for so many thousands of years, exile has been a state of permanence for the Jewish people that it's only recently that we were able to consider V'heveti, I will bring you, as a celebration. Hence, for many people, the cup of Elijah. The cup of Elijah is the 5th cup in which we fill it, but we don't drink it, because the relationship to V'heveti, to arriving and living in the land safely, has been tenuous. And even though now we don't feel it's tenuous, the arc of history will show us that we had years in and years out. There were at least 2 major exiles from the land of Israel. So there's a bit of a hedge, which is no different than what Moses encounters in Egypt. The people are hedging. Yes, it's awful here. We work like slaves, but the unknown, for a promise, for a God we don't know. Now you have to just look at the 3 names of God that are presented to Moshe here. Elohim is the God of mercy. Elohim is understood as the one who dominates through mercy. El Shaddai is the feminine. You've probably heard of the Shekhinah sort of being the spiritual locus, the center of God. But El Shaddai, if we break it down, El means Lord, or the God. Shaddai, which emanates from the idea that it is the God of sustenance. And the rabbis, and it's also linked to Shaddayim, the breast, in other words, that which sustains. And it is a soft, almost feminine version of God's name. El Shaddai is the one who sustains, Elohim is mercy, and Adonai is seen as justice. What is being called upon now to redeem the people from Egypt is not the merciful one, because there's inevitably going to be an accounting for the Egyptian people. It can't be the one who sustains, because there's about to be huge destruction. So it has to be the God of justice. And justice inherently is unfair. Even though cosmically you might say it sets the right and wrong back into order, somebody suffers. And there's a lot of collateral damage, as you can see, especially with animals and firstborn. Now, there is a horrible human feature called Schadenfreude, in which we celebrate the downfall of our enemies. And there are times when it's inappropriate. Because just because your enemy has fallen does not mean you lose all capacity for kindness and mercy. You should not. It's easy to say. It's not so easy to do. But still, it is an ideal. And Judaism, if anything, is a series of ideals. And what we learn from the story of the Exodus in Egypt is that even upon the destruction of Pharaoh and his kingdom, there was a deliberate effort made to downplay the joy and the victory. And let me give you a couple examples. Upon the destruction of Egypt and the celebration of our Exodus on Passover, of course, during services, we recite Hallel. Hallel is a series of texts which are taken from the Psalms, and they are praise to God. And they're essentially King David's or other poets' sort of tableau of suffering and loss and redemption and rejoicing. It's an expression, it's an uplifting expression, often sung together, of gratitude for salvation. So the Hallel is known as the Halb Hallel, half Hallel, or Ganz Hallel, or complete Hallel. And Halb Hallel, there's 2 paragraphs missing, and Ganz Hallel means we recite the entire thing with those 2 paragraphs in. Of course, as a kid, we always wanted it to be half Hallel because we get through it faster, but nevertheless, it's not that there's a huge difference between half and full. There's only 2 paragraphs. But significance of identifying a festival with a half Hallel versus one with a full Hallel tells you about the weight of the holiday. And on Passover, we recite, at some point, we recite only half Hallel. Why is it that on Passover, one of the major biblical holidays, one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals, we don't give it the weight of reciting the entire Hallel? It's fascinating. Read the Midrash about this conversation that happens between God and the angels. The angels, who in the Midrash are clearly in support of what's just, which is that Israel should be redeemed, want to say Shira. They want to give praise. They want to sing a song of gratitude for having watched Egypt drown in the sea, be destroyed by the wave. Pharaoh and his army are in turmoil, and Israel is saved. So of course you want to have the Hallelujah chorus. It's a beautiful moment. Not so fast, says God. Just imagine this conversation. Not so fast. I appreciate the joy, but he says, or God, kavayachol, as if it's possible, anthropomorphically, which we know it's not, but this is our imagination speaking. The text of the Midrash says, Ma'aseh yadai tovim bayam, the creations of my own hands are drowning in the sea, va'atem omrim shira, with a question mark, and you want to sing a song? Yes, the Hebrews are saved, but my own creation, my handiwork, my children are also drowning in the sea. How do you balance the two? The answer is you don't. So we, say the half Hallel. Because even though we appreciate the victory and the salvation, we will never forget that it came at a huge cost for others. What an extraordinary idea. Also, remember the part where you dip your finger in the cup and you put some off to the side, indicative of blood? It's also indicative of loss, the fact that while our cup seems full, others do not have the fullness of the cup. So we remove some of our fullness because we recognize that others suffered. There's an extraordinary sensitivity in this. It's the anti-Schadenfreude. It's the anti-unbridled joy at the downfall of others, particularly at the death and destruction of others. It is a very hard thing to do. Very hard. It's hard to accomplish, but then again, as I said, it's an ideal. And what would we be if we couldn't strive to great ideals? So Passover provides us with this opportunity to both express our joy, but also express the limitations of joy. And it all comes out of today's portion, the 4 cups, the 5th cup, the idea that the cup is the center of our expression about loss and our cup being full. So there's that idea about the Hallel and the cup. And when we return to the story of Pharaoh and the Hebrews, we also find one of the deepest references to Holocaust theology. And it comes from Reb Kalman Kloinimus, also known as the Eish Kodesh, the Rebbe of Piasetzna, which has become very popular. And a lot of people have written on him. And I urge you to, if you can, go online and find Professor Jim Diamond's treatise on the Eish Kodesh, who was a rabbi in a ghetto during the destruction of the ghetto, and his sermons were captured and written by his students after Shabbat, and they were hidden and they were found. And he fundamentally believes that redemption is coming. And reading this story today is what drives him. And he says, in so many words, he says, God, you've seen our suffering, and you've promised redemption to your people. But the time is now. Redemption then, redemption in the future doesn't help us now. We are being destroyed now. And he never loses faith. But it's clear he's challenging the notion of what value is salvation in the future when we need it now. The story of Exodus is one in which the promise of salvation happens now. And sure enough, Moses is now sent on a mission to make the salvation happen by whatever means deemed appropriate. In this case, 10 plagues, the death of the firstborn, Exodus. But the salvation happens now. And while we want to believe that the future is better, we are asking for it to be now. It's hard to believe in something that could happen in the future, but when you need it, it's not available. And without comparing Holocaust, Exodus to COVID, it is very clear that human nature is such that promises of help in the future don't hold as much water as promises for help today. And what we are seeing is a direct challenge to the value of the promises being made. The promise of a vaccine, the promise of a future without COVID, the possibility that COVID will always be here to stay, it will just mutate into something else. The possibility that maybe it will just diminish and turn back into just an old-fashioned cold virus where nobody dies, or most people don't, and it's low risk. or that the vaccine will be 100% effective, we can go back to normal lives, or that there will be enough and distribution will be fine. All these promises that are being made, whether they're micro or macro promises, they're about salvation. And we're demanding salvation now. And countries are looking at others like Israel going, you vaccinated what? A quarter of your population in a few weeks? Well, I'm not diminishing anything anyone does. It's a different story entirely. What's going on here, every country is different. And yes, there's a lot of blame to go around. There's also a lot of support to go around. We should be supporting the people who ultimately are in charge, because that's who we've got. If you don't like the captain, you got to get on a new ship. Right now, there's only one ship. India is about to launch a vaccination program. Let's see how far that goes and how quickly. My goodness, can you imagine the logistical nightmare of trying to vaccinate your population in India? Canada would seem like child's play compared to that. But we want the salvation today. And that's why I need to tell you something about the Shut Your Mouth edition of Parshat Va'era. There's a lot of chatter, a lot of talk, a lot of experts, a lot of scientific experts. I hear from people who are now paranoid because they watched a video, and the video they heard an expert of some note. He's an expert. He must be. It says he's a doctor. I heard from people telling me that they're afraid to go out of their house now because people are being stopped on the street by the police and being told that they're going to be arrested unless they have a reason to be out. There are blockades on the highways. Did you hear that? I was told. There are what? Yes, blockades on the highways. You have to go through a checkpoint. No, the last checkpoint I went through, not in Basque Country, not in Israel, not in the West Bank, it was in the American Southwest at the border with Mexico. There are regular checkpoints on all the roads leading from Mexico up north into Texas. That's the last checkpoint I was in. There are no checkpoints on the highways. The police do not have the power that is being claimed by these people. And there's a sense of paranoia. But there are a lot of experts out there. And here's the problem. The problem is, it's easy to open your mouth. It is easy to say whatever you want. And if you're really smart, you can actually string together a lot of bad stuff. And if you're really, really smart, you can make a lot of money at it. And then there are also people who are downplaying, who are making it insignificant. And that's just as much of a problem. There's a balance, there's a measurement. There's a difference between what we need to talk about and what we should talk about and what we should not talk about. And I'm not suggesting in any way that I believe that science is always right. Science is always developing, yes. There isn't always a right in science. I don't believe that all of politics has disappeared because of COVID and everyone's just getting along. I don't believe that we're doing the right thing for everybody. I don't believe that everybody is going to benefit from the measures the government takes. Some people will benefit more, some will benefit less. A lot of it is common sense, but then a lot of it is also hard to manage. And if you're lucky enough to not be terribly affected by COVID, other than maybe your own personal life being squashed into a little tiny space called stay home, just imagine people who have to actually work in dangerous environments for a living. Just think about frontline workers. Think about people who are exposed to people with COVID every single day. Think about people who are living in long-term care homes where they are most likely to get sick. Think about people in manufacturing jobs where they are most likely to get sick. Think about people who have no choice, who live with more people in their home than they want, who have no control over their environment. And that is why we get to this week's Haftarah. One of the greatest natural haftorahs I've come across in a very long time. And by natural, I mean the references to nature and the animal kingdom are so extraordinary. And it references in the words of Ezekiel, who is always a vivid poet and always creates colorful imaginary scenarios. In the works of Ezekiel, he's always referred to by God as Ben Adam, son of man. In other words, human being. And here in chapter 29 in Ezekiel, in the 10th year, in the 10th month, on the 12th day of the month, the word of God came unto me, saying, Son of man, set your face against Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and prophesy against him, and against all of Egypt. And this is what you should say. So says the Lord God. This is the prophecy of Ezekiel. Behold, I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon that lies in the midst of the river, that has said, the river is my own, and I have made it for myself. The great river is the River Nile, the longest river in the world. The river is almost 6,700 kilometers long. And the great dragon that lies in the river is obviously the Nile crocodile, which can grow up to almost 20 feet in length. Just imagine the size of that creature, 20 feet in length. And that dragon that lies in the river believes it belongs to itself, to it. And Ezekiel says to Pharaoh through the prophecy, I will put hooks in your jaws, says God, and I will cause the fish of your river to stick unto your scales, and I will bring you up out of the midst of your river, and all the fish of the river will stick unto your scales, and I will cast you into the wilderness. A crocodile without water cannot survive. And the fish obviously cannot survive. Now just think about the fish in the Nile River. Have you ever heard of the Nile River perch? A perch, if you ever went fishing here in Ontario, you think of a perch as what? Maximum 4 pounds, 5 pounds. Maybe there's larger perch you can buy. You can buy 20-pound perch, maybe. But the Nile River perch can be up to 300 pounds and 6 feet long. 6 feet long. I could be a Nile River perch. Can you imagine the size of that fish? Can you imagine the size of that fish stuck onto the scales of a massive crocodile, the dragon that lies in the river, flung with hooks in its jaw out into the wilderness? Just think about the visual. And God says, I am against you, Pharaoh. Pharaoh, the king dragon. So clearly, it's this week's Haftorah. But here's the thing you need to know about crocodiles. And it's something you learn very quickly if you actually watch how they wrangle crocodiles. There was a show on a little while ago, it might still be on Netflix, I don't know where it was, of crocodile wranglers in Australia who are called in to deal with saltwater crocodiles and move them out of livestock areas and where kids are and families are. And think about this. A crocodile's bite force, in other words, when it snaps its jaw shut, can exert 5,000 pounds per foot. 5,000 pounds per foot can just crush metal. It can certainly crush bone in a human being. 5,000 pounds per foot is extraordinary power. And there is probably one of the strongest bites in the animal kingdom is the Nile crocodile. And when they close their mouth, it's with great force and great destructive possibility. But here's the thing you need to know. They have incredibly weak muscles to open their mouth. To open a crocodile's mouth exerts all their capability, and on a regular-sized crocodile, a human being can hold their snout and they will be unable to open their mouth. On larger, you put duct tape, simply duct tape or rope around their mouth, they cannot open it. If you manage to catch your crocodile with its mouth shut and you tie it up, it cannot open it, and therefore it can harm you maybe with its tail, but if you immobilize it, their mouth cannot open and you will not be subject to that snapping force which is destructive. So imagine this, the strongest bite has the weakest opening. And my friends, I need to say something. It is time that people start having less open mouth and more shut mouth. Don't ruin it for all of us. We need to stay home. We need some kind of controls to help us get through. Don't tell me that if there were no rules and it was just left up to the individual, we'd be safer. I do not want to die from COVID, and neither do you. So complain all you want, but you might want to consider, like the crocodile, it's time to put more force into keeping your mouth shut than opening your mouth. It's time. We need everybody's help to get rid of this. And all the experts with the big open mouths, not very helpful. Listen to your doctors. Listen to the people who brought you here. Listen to the people who are going to get us out of here. We don't like all of it. Yes, you want to complain? Go for it. But please, those of us who just want to have healthy lives and return to normal, please don't ruin it for all of us. There's a lot of us who need more shut mouth and less open mouth. Shabbat shalom.